Hello class, my name is Bianca Propoy, and today I will be discussing the Great Migration. When people think about the Great Migration, the first thought is usually African Americans from the South migrating north. But there was a second wave, where African Americans went west. During the second wave of the Great Migration, which began in 1940 and ended in 1970, over 500,000 African Americans from the South went to the Midwest and the West. The primary reasons for this migration were just a tad bit different from the reasons why they went north. For decades, African Americans have been migrating north, but once the United States entered into World War II, African Americans set their eyes on the West. Some of the cities African Americans migrated to were Los Angeles, Oakland, Long Beach, and Richmond. Most of the African Americans who migrated to California came from Louisiana, Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. For this migration, the push-pull theory and Ravenstein's laws of migration fit perfectly. The push factors for African Americans were the constant racism they faced, as well as the social and political disadvantages, along with the lack of economic growth. On the other hand, the pull factors were better job opportunities. Due to the war, there was a greater and more urgent need for defense weapons. Because of this need, more and more industrial jobs were created. Another pull factor is that many African Americans already had families in the West. This will make migration much easier and less stressful because they would have help, job connections, and an already established place to live. We see that the Great Migration also fits into Ravenstein's laws of migration. For example, he noted that people that come from agriculture areas were the ones that tended to move to industrial places rather than vice versa. The South focused primarily on agriculture, whereas the North and the West tended to be more industrial. In the West, the jobs tended to be higher paying based on skill, though some jobs were very hazardous. One example of this is the disaster at Port Chicago occurring in 1944, where military weapons, ammunition, and equipment exploded, killing over 200 African Americans. While the jobs could be dangerous, the benefits outweighed the cons. Whereas in the South, your position was determined solely on your status. African Americans, regardless of how skilled they were, had to work in lower paying positions that allowed for no economic growth. Another pattern noted by him is that migration increases as industrialization does, along with better transportation. While settling down in the West was easier thanks to African American communities already being there, getting to the West was even easier thanks to the improvements of transportation. One of the factors often overlooked in migration is the journey itself. While economic stability, better education, and a better life overall plays a huge part, people would be more likely to migrate if the journey was short and easy as opposed to a journey where you have to cross oceans. During the Great Migration, highways and trains were already in place. The trains could easily connect them to their destination, making the journey much less stressful and less confusing. The second wave of the Great Migration ended in 1970. Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Oakland combined had a population of over 250,000 African Americans. In total, close to 400,000 African Americans had moved to the West, whereas decades before it was only 50,000. The move signified a great change for African Americans, as by the end, over 80% lived in cities. To add on, majority of African Americans had stopped working in agriculture and had instead worked in industrial places that allowed them more economic growth than ever before. Close to 400,000 African Americans had moved to the West, whereas decades before it was only 50,000.